It was 3 a.m. when my phone rang, slicing through the silence like a knife. On the screen, my husband's name glowed. His voice was steady, almost bored. "Your apartment's on fire. Hope you have insurance." Most people would have screamed, panicked, begged for answers. But I didn't. I started laughing, not because I'd lost everything, but because I realized something far darker. He wanted me destroyed, erased, written out of my own life. And in that instant, I knew the flames weren't the end. They were only the beginning of my war. It was 3 a.m. when the call came. Daniel's voice steady, almost casual. "Your apartment's on fire. Hope you have insurance." The words didn't land like news. They landed like a verdict. I laughed, brittle, metallic, because the tone wasn't shock, wasn't fear. It was relief. Relief that something he wanted had finally happened. On paper, my life was enviable. The loft glittered with skylight gold, curated furniture, framed photographs of a marriage that looked unshakable. At dinners, his family staged perfection. Crystal glasses, rehearsed smiles, his mother praising me as our brilliant girl, while her eyes traveled over cutlery like an auditor. His sister touched my wrist too often, her compliments folded in barbs. Daniel himself played the role of the successful, steady husband, and I, obedient actress, performed a life that looked flawless from a distance. That night, the fire trucks painted the street red, neighbors gathered with voyeuristic sympathy, and I stood barefoot in a borrowed coat watching my apartment dissolve into smoke. Daniel arrived late, hair perfect, car spotless. He placed his hand on my back as if guiding me through a gallery. "We'll sort this out," he said. His voice was steady, as though this disaster was an errand on his calendar. I searched his eyes for grief and found only calculation. He took me to his family's home, where the guest room walls were lined with our wedding photos. Once they had been proof of belonging. That night, they looked like exhibits, evidence of a role I had been cast in. I lay awake, replaying his voice, hearing an extra sound in the background, the click of a lighter. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. By dawn, headlines called the fire an accident. Faulty wiring, tragic but survivable. They used a gala photograph of me smiling in a black dress, champagne flute in hand. At breakfast, his mother patted my fingers. "Insurance will restore what matters." Daniel spoke of a claims adjuster he already contacted. His family treated the destruction of my life like a logistical problem. No one asked what I had lost beyond objects. I smiled into the tablecloth and kept the truth to myself. My laugh wasn't hysteria, it was recognition. I returned to the wreckage alone. My home was ribs of charred beams and blackened windows. Where my security camera once hung, wires were clipped clean, curled like worms. The hallway mount was gone too. Fires do not dismantle cameras. Accidents don't erase evidence. Someone had prepared the scene. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't know. Don't trust anyone in that family. The fire is only the beginning. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting someone to emerge from the soot. "Who are you?" I typed. No reply. I saved the number as Ash, like what was left of my home. Later, I walked into Daniel's office unannounced. The mirrors in the lobby forced me to watch us together. Him, immaculate, me smudged by smoke. He smiled, professional, placing a guiding hand on my elbow. "You shouldn't be alone," he said. "The police will update you soon. I've filed the insurance already." He spoke as though my apartment had been a spreadsheet he had just balanced. "What about the building's cameras?" I asked. He shrugged, smooth as marble. "Probably failed in the heat." He was always certain of convenient truths. That evening, his sister delivered lavender sheets to the guest room. She lingered, eyes cataloging my things. "Daniel worries about your separate accounts," she said softly. "Men like stability." Her words were dressed as advice but carried the weight of warning. After she left, I checked my bag. Nothing missing except another layer of trust. At dusk, Ash sent another message. Check the building's power logs, 1:55 to 2:10 a.m. My hands shook as I found the maintenance portal and guessed through security questions. There it was. At 2:03 a.m., the system recorded a scheduled outage, requested by no name at all. A blank field, an invisible hand. The absence screamed louder than any presence. That night, the house exhaled wealth in quiet sighs. I lay beneath perfumed sheets, rehearsing futures I hadn't dared imagine. My phone lit again. Ash. The footage won't save you. It was disabled before the first spark. Find who knew your camera schedule. Don't ask why I know. Ask why I care. I stared into the dark until it rearranged itself into familiar faces. Daniel's polished smile, his sister's probing glance, his mother's approving silence. My fingers typed almost without me. Why are you helping me? The reply came like a match flaring in a still room, because I took the same test, and I didn't laugh. I learned quickly that weakness can be sharper than any blade if you let people believe it is real. I walked back into Daniel's house wearing borrowed clothes that smelled of smoke, my hair unwashed, my eyes heavy. I dropped my suitcase in the foyer like a defeated guest. I don't know where else to go, I whispered. His mother's smile was thin as a blade. Well, your family. For now? His sister's eyes glinted with something less subtle. Daniel has enough on his plate, she said. But if you need a bed, I suppose you'll find one here. Their voices carried the same music. Rachel, the dependent. Rachel, the burden. I let them think I was a parasite. I lowered my gaze, pretended the marble floors and chandeliers crushed me. At dinners, I sat small in my chair while they spoke around me. Daniel, polished as ever, slipped his hand across his sister's wine glass as if he owned her air. She'll settle soon, he told his mother. Insurance will take care of it. His words cut sharper than the steak knife he polished against his napkin. But weakness was my performance, not my truth. At night, I lay awake, phone in hand, scrolling back to Ash's messages. Each sentence was a vein of heat. Don't trust them. The fire was staged, and then the file he sent, a compressed audio clip. My thumb hovered before I pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, low and transactional. No, she won't be there. I'll make sure. Just finish the job. There was the unmistakable sound of a lighter flick, the echo of a man sealing a contract with flame. I replayed it until my skin turned cold. Weakness? No, this was war. I started assembling weapons the way others arrange silverware. My separate accounts were still intact. Daniel had not yet breached those. I reached out quietly to a lawyer I trusted, a woman who had once helped me negotiate a contract Daniel never knew existed. She didn't ask for explanations. Keep everything digital, she advised. Don't bring paper into that house. Her voice was a thread I held onto in the dark. Then I called a name I had promised myself never to call again, an old contact from a cybersecurity firm that operated far below legal thresholds. He laughed when he recognized my voice. Rachel, the wife who always looked too perfect. What took you so long? I didn't answer. Some debts don't need explanation. He went to work faster than I expected. Within days, he unearthed files buried behind Daniel's polished email account. One folder bore my name. Inside were scripts, images, and timelines. At first they looked harmless, family photographs, video clips from holidays. But the deeper he dug, the more grotesque the collection became. My face was spliced into scenes I had never lived, screaming in empty rooms, hurling objects, lighting a match near curtains. The videos pulsed with eerie precision, every movement close enough to reality to poison a courtroom. This isn't just blackmail, my contact told me. This is character assassination. He's building a deepfake archive. He wants to erase your credibility before you even open your mouth. I sat frozen, watching myself on screen, a distorted Rachel, one breath away from madness. In one clip, the fake me stood in my living room, striking a lighter, flame reflected in my eyes. The angle matched the perspective of my own security camera. The The same camera whose wires I'd found clipped. A perfect loop of guilt prepared for the moment Daniel needed me destroyed. I closed the laptop, pressing both hands against the lid as if holding something dangerous inside. I thought of the laughter that had escaped me the night of the fire, how absurd it had sounded. But this wasn't absurd anymore. This was a game where I had been cast as the villain of my own story, and Daniel, my husband, was directing the film. I learned to play my part with the precision of an actress who has rehearsed every scene. I returned to Daniel not as the woman who suspected, not as the woman who knew, but as the contrite wife who sought forgiveness. "I should have trusted you," I murmured, eyes lowered, the weight of ashes still in my hair. Daniel tilted his head, considering me as if I were a stalk that had dropped, but might still recover. "Then let's move forward," he said. He kissed my cheek, a politician's kiss, shallow and perfectly staged. While I smiled at him, my hands were busy elsewhere. I bought small devices, hidden microphones no larger than a coin, and placed them in the crevices of his family's house, beneath the lip of the dining table, inside a lamp in the living room, tucked into the velvet lining of his sister's jewelry case. At night, when the house hummed with the arrogance of wealth, I lay in bed scrolling through audio logs. Their voices spilled into my headphones. His mother worrying about reputation, his sister whispering about assets, Daniel himself on the phone with someone unnamed discussing my mental instability. Each file was another brick in the wall I was building against them. One evening, I sat in the kitchen feigning domestic devotion, chopping herbs with meticulous slowness. Daniel walked in and leaned against the counter, studying me with a gaze that lasted too long. "You've changed," he said. I let the knife rest flat on the cutting board. "Maybe I've learned my place." He smiled faintly, but suspicion lingered in his eyes. He had begun to sense the shift. Yet suspicion is not proof, and doubt has a way of gnawing from within. The more he doubted, the more carefully he overplayed his control. That was my trap, and he was stepping into it willingly. The house became a stage for my long con. I laughed when they mocked me, nodded when they called me fragile, and listened when they plotted with careless tongues. Behind closed doors, I sent recordings to my lawyer, who archived them like sacred texts. Every whisper was ammunition. Every insult was evidence. The tension reached its peak during a family meeting Daniel convened in the grand dining room. His mother presided like a queen, his sister arrived dripping in jewels, and I sat quietly at the end of the table, the ghost they thought already defeated. Daniel cleared his throat. "Rachel needs guidance. She's been under stress, and her behavior lately, well, it's troubling. We must protect the family's interests." Protect interests. Words that disguise their true intent. Remove me, erase me, cut me out of the picture. I did not interrupt. I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. His sister leaned forward. She was never suited for this family. Daniel and I discussed it before the wedding. If she falters, if she exposes us, we cannot allow her to destroy what we've built. Her admission dropped into the room like a stone into water, rippling outward. For a moment, no one breathed. I kept my eyes on the polished wood of the table, as though her words had not pierced me. But inside, something shifted. A door opened in the labyrinth, and I knew I was no longer prey, but the architect of their collapse. Later that night, while the house slept, I sifted through Daniel's locked cabinet with gloves on my hands. Hidden beneath folders of property deeds and financial statements was a contract thick with legal jargon. My pulse quickened as I skimmed the lines. A massive life insurance policy, recently updated, naming his sister as the sole beneficiary. Not Daniel, not his mother, his sister. The betrayal bloomed wider than I had imagined. The fire was only the beginning, and I was not the only one marked for erasure. They were preparing to consume each other, piece by piece, until only the hungriest survived. I folded the contract back into place and closed the drawer softly. My reflection in the cabinet glass stared back at me. No longer the grieving wife, no longer the fragile outsider. I was the woman who laughed when the fire came, the woman who collected voices in the dark, the woman who could watch them devour themselves and strike only when the moment was perfect. And when I struck, it would not be with weakness. It would be with fire of my own. The evidence I had gathered was no longer a secret I could cradle in my pocket. It had grown too heavy, too sharp. One by one, I released fragments of it. Audio clips, financial ledgers, fragments of conversations, until Daniel could feel the walls closing in, his charm cracked in places, his smiles too rigid, his words too carefully measured. At dinner, I dropped the first bomb, a recording of his voice arranging the fire. The room froze as his sister's wine glass tilted, spilling red across the linen like blood. His mother gasped his name, her practiced poise collapsing. Daniel tried to dismiss it. "A fabrication," he said, waving his hand, but I met his eyes across the table and pressed play again. His words filled the room, undeniable, the cadence of his guilt echoing back to him. He stood then, jaw tight, looking not at me but at the walls, as if calculating their angles. "We should all calm down," he said, but calm had deserted him. The next morning, police arrived. Neighbors watched from their driveways as Daniel stood on the porch, his suit pressed, his expression composed. They questioned him, but his answers came too smoothly, his confidence rehearsed. By evening, I learned why. He had raced ahead of me. On the evening news, my own face filled the screen. The anchor's voice was solemn. New footage suggests the fire may have been started intentionally by Rachel Whitman, the victim herself. Then the video played, me, or rather the uncanny imitation of me, moving through my apartment, holding a lighter to curtains, watching flames climb the wall. It was a deep fake, meticulous, terrifyingly precise. My smile in the footage was cold, almost gleeful. The public saw not a woman betrayed, but a woman unhinged. I stared at the television, a nausea clawing at my throat. The trap had sprung. Daniel had painted me as the architect of my own destruction. For a moment, despair pressed down so hard I thought I might collapse under it. But then quietly I laughed again, because he had underestimated me. That night, I activated the Phoenix Protocol, the plan I had been building in silence. I sent a single encrypted file to a journalist I trusted, then another to my lawyer, then dozens more to anonymous Dropboxes across the internet. Within hours, Daniel's empire began to fracture. His offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the forged contracts, all of it surfaced like corpses rising through dark water. The media storm was immediate. Headlines shouted betrayal, fraud, and conspiracy. Investors fled his company overnight, leaving the stock to collapse in free fall. His mother locked herself in her bedroom, curtains drawn. His sister, stripped of jewels she could no longer afford, screamed at him in the driveway while cameras recorded every syllable. I watched it unfold with an eerie calm. Years of being diminished, underestimated, erased. It all collapsed into this one moment of rebirth. I was no longer the ghost in their house. I was the fire that consumed it. But victory carries its own shadows. A package arrived at my door, no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in block letters. "You've only scratched the surface." My pulse hammered as I loaded the files. The screen filled with documents not from Daniel, but about him. Surveillance logs, intercepted emails, photographs taken without his knowledge. The metadata pointed to someone else entirely, someone outside the family, someone who had orchestrated pieces of this game long before I understood I was in it. Daniel wasn't the mastermind. He was just another pawn. I leaned back, the glow of the screen painting my face in cold light. My laughter this time was quieter, a hum beneath my breath. The fire had not ended with him. It had only cleared the field for a far more dangerous player. Victory came, but it did not feel like triumph. It felt like silence, the kind that follows an explosion when ears are still ringing. Daniel's company had crumbled, his family's name dragged through headlines, and the world pointed to me, not as a survivor, but as the executioner. The woman who burned her marriage to the ground, one magazine called me. Friends stopped returning calls. Acquaintances crossed the street when they saw me coming. They whispered words like ruthless, heartless monster. I had wanted justice, but what I received was exile in plain sight. I felt myself harden day by day. The softness I once carried, the desire to be loved, to belong, was gone. I could no longer look at a face without scanning it for hidden betrayal. Every smile seemed like a mask, every kind word a weapon. I had become the mirror of what they accused me of: cold, untouchable, unreachable. Perhaps that was the price of surviving their fire. One evening, as I sorted through the wreckage of documents I had yet to destroy, I found an envelope slid beneath my door. No address, no stamp. Just my name, written in thick, black ink. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet. Everything you've seen is only the surface. No signature, no explanation. But the words were a crack through the armor I had built, a reminder that my war was not over. I turned to the USB I had received earlier, replaying the files, tracing metadata, following digital fingerprints into corners I had missed. And there it was, a trail that led not to Daniel, not to his sister, but to someone who had always been in the shadows of my search, the hacker who had once seemed like an ally. Ash. The realization chilled me. The warnings, the files, the recordings, they had been real, but they had also been bait. Ash hadn't just uncovered evidence, he had planted it, shaped it, curated it like an artist. My laughter, my resistance, my vengeance, it had all unfolded inside a maze he designed. That night, my laptop screen flickered, and without a command from me, a video file opened. Ash's face appeared, not in shadows, but clear, unmasked, illuminated by the glow of his own monitors. His eyes were steady, his mouth curved in something between affection and cruelty. "Rachel," he said, "you did well. Better than I hoped." I sat frozen, my heart hammering as he continued. "You were never just a victim. You were my project. I wanted to see how far you would go once the fire stripped you bare. Would you collapse? Would you crawl? Or would you rise?" He leaned closer to the camera, and I could see the reflection of my own deep fake image in his glasses. "You rose beautifully. You're everything I wanted you to be." The screen split. On one side was Ash speaking. On the other, a reel of me, real and fake, stitched together, my laughter outside the burning apartment, my trembling hands after the phone call, my fabricated image striking a lighter. Truth and fiction blurred until I couldn't tell which woman was truly me anymore. "You see," Ash said softly, "I didn't set one fire. I set many. The blaze in your apartment, the blaze in your marriage, the blaze in your soul. All I had to do was watch which one consumed you first." He smiled then, a smile that was calm, clinical. "And Rachel, you did not disappoint. You became exactly what I wanted, untouchable, feared, alone." The video ended with static, but the echo of his words clung to me long after. I closed the laptop, staring into the reflection of my own face in the black screen. For the first time, I wondered if I had been fighting Daniel's war, or if I had been living inside Ash's experiment all along. And the thought that frightened me most was not that I had been manipulated, but that I had thrived inside his design. Ash's words clung to me like smoke, seeping into the walls of my mind long after his video ended. "You're my project. You rose beautifully." For hours, I sat before the blackened laptop screen, my reflection staring back at me, fractured between triumph and horror. If everything I had done, every strike against Daniel, every calculated step of survival, had been inside Ash's maze, What did that make me? A victor or a puppet? The despair almost swallowed me, but then something harder surfaced, something beyond anger or fear. If Ash wanted me to be his project, then I would burn the laboratory to the ground. I would not remain a specimen under glass. I would rewrite the rules. I returned to the USB he had sent, examining each file line by line. He was careful, but not invincible. Metadata revealed breadcrumbs he must have thought invisible. An IP address masked but imperfectly a digital fingerprint in the margins of the files. I followed them, each one a step deeper into his architecture, until I began to see the lattice of his empire. This was no lone hacker. This was a network, sprawling and intricate. Politicians whose scandals vanished overnight, corporations laundering billions through shell companies, influencers whose images were scrubbed of any flaw. Ash wasn't simply testing me, he was testing the world, bending reality at will, deciding who rose and who burned. I stared at the map of connections, the glowing nodes stretching across continents, and I understood. My story was only one of many. I hesitated. To strike at him meant striking at all of them. I would expose not just Ash, but a machine designed to rewrite truth itself. I might not survive it. The world might not forgive me. But forgiveness had never saved me before, so I began my counterattack. I called on the lawyer who had once kept my secrets and the old contact in cybersecurity who still owed me favors. I worked through nights fueled by the steady hum of rage and clarity. Piece by piece, we dismantled Ash's veil of anonymity. We uncovered the servers, the offshore accounts, the vaults of blackmail and falsehood. I built an archive, my own arsenal, not hidden in the dark, but prepared for daylight. When the system was ready, I pressed send. Encrypted files cascaded into the inboxes of journalists, watchdog organizations, independent coders hungry for truth. Hours later, the headlines screamed across the world. Shadow network exposed. Politicians, CEOs, and media giants linked to global manipulation ring. The fire spread faster than I could follow, and then came the backlash. Screens filled with Ash's image for the first time, no longer a ghost but a hunted man. Governments denied involvement, corporations scrambled, the public reeled. But my name was dragged back into the storm. Rachel Whitman, whistleblower or traitor? They asked. The woman who burned her husband and now burns the world. I knew this would happen. I knew once I lit the match, there would be no path back to the life I had once wanted, and I accepted it, because better to live as fire than die as ash. But the victory was fragile. Hours after the leaks, I received one final message from Ash. No video this time, no gloating smile, just words, well played, but every fire consumes the one who lights it. I closed my eyes, the weight of his prophecy pressing against me. He was right about one thing. I no longer had a future here. My name was scorched, my face too recognizable, my silence impossible. If I stayed, they would hunt me until I became another ghost in his archives. So I made my choice. I liquidated what remained of my accounts, left behind the house, the possessions, even the remnants of evidence I no longer needed. At dawn, I walked through the airport alone, carrying nothing but a single bag and the weight of my own freedom. The flight was half empty, the hum of the engines a lullaby against the chaos I had unleashed. I watched the city shrink beneath me, the skyline disappearing into clouds. For the first time in years, I felt the absence of chains. I was no longer Rachel the wife, Rachel the victim, Rachel the avenger. I was not even Rachel the whistleblower. I was something else entirely, something unowned, unclaimed. The experiment had failed because Ash had wanted a creature bound to his design. Instead, I had become untethered. As the plane pierced the horizon, I whispered into the hum of the cabin, words no camera could fake, no hacker could script. No one owns me anymore. And for the first time, the laughter that rose in my chest was not brittle or broken. It was real. It was mine.